Welcome to Conversations with the Authors.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Conversations with the Authors. I'm your host, Daniel.
And I'm Daryl.
And I'm Sandra.
Today we're talking about flaws in writing. Remember, this is not a TED Talk. This is not a scripted podcast. We have notes, but, we're not here to hammer you over the head. This is just a chit-chat between you, me, and our authors, who happen to be the highly rated and Eric Hoffer nominated authors of How Nicholas Became Santa Claus. So we're talking about flaws in writing, and it would be a flaw not to thank Alexander Nakarada for writing our intro, because, man, it is something else. But also when we talk about flaws, Sandy, we talk about, for instance, magic systems that are too powerful, that it makes our characters invincible, or prophecies that come true so perfectly that the characters, even though they have free will, it still happens. We talk about love stories between two characters who have no chemistry or no reason to be together, and we talk about villains who are just evil for the sake of being evil. And these are all things that you talked about, wrote about in How Nicholas Became Santa Claus, this amazing fantasy novel. We have Nicholas, who is sort of understanding who he is and how he comes to be, as the title explains, and there are so many interesting and magical characters in his party, for lack of a better term. How did you deal with these sort of flaws, not making our magic characters too powerful, and not making our villainous for the sake of being a villain, or not falling in love for the sake of falling in love because I like these two characters and they should totally be together? How did you accomplish that?
With redundant outlines.
Mm-hmm.
I had outlines for every character and every environment that the character was in, and then I tried to combine them all, and then I had Daddy to go behind me and double check and say no.
I think the important thing is to make sure that your characters have the chemistry and the right motivations.
Yes.
They're not evil just to be evil, or they're not in love because you stuck them together. That would be torturous for anybody to read.
Yes.
So you have to lead up to these things. You have to give some background and some understanding to the reader why this person is the way they are. So just do your outline and be very careful and examine it and make sure that it makes sense. It has to make sense.
And we talk about outlines and a lot of things, a lot of flaws, and writing sometimes happen to be that the story is not well fleshed out, and not necessarily, the plot, but the world itself. You're creating this, canvas on which you're painting these characters, these stories, and it has to make sense.
When you're writing an outline is not really so simple because, for instance, you take each character. Suppose you have 8 characters, for instance. You take each one of those and you give that person a background. You give them their motivations. You tell about how they were raised and what they value. And so whether you use that in the story or not is another thing, but what you've done is you fleshed out that character.
You created this, dossier, for lack of a better term.
Right, and you can pick and choose from that. And so it makes your characters whole.
Right.
And so that's not something that's in the outline which you write the story from, but it's set aside and something that you can glance at and look at and say, well, what color was my character's eyes, or what does he not like? What is it about him?
Right.
And so you've got this whole, like you said, a dossier on this person.
And Sandy, you created this story with your husband, and these characters, because of that, are not flat, which is one of the flaws that you want to avoid. And
You have to pump your characters up.
Pump them up, yes. And so
Or make them really, really tiny.
Right. And then, like our light sprites. But it also helps with plot holes, right? And plot holes are just things that, are illogical to the storyline, I guess. That doesn't make, why did that happen? That doesn't make sense. Why is, the Fonz jumping a motorcycle over, why? It doesn't make sense. What's the point of it, right?
Things have to make sense.
And that's part of it. What do you think is the biggest thing that an amateur writer or even veteran writers might do when it comes
I think more something to watch out for amateur writers is that it's the way they tell the tale. They are narrators, and sometimes if their language is very pedestrian,
right,
then in certain ways, then they can say things that sound very, very flat. It's like, well, Mike, John wanted to give her a free gift, so he watched as she came through the door. Well, number one, free gift is a tautology. They call it a tautology.
Yeah, we were talking about that before the podcast, and these are like redundancies, right?
It's a redundancy, and you want to, or you're the narrator, and you're saying, he came into close proximity to the man he was looking for. And the author wrote that with all seriousness, I suppose, but saying close proximity is a flaw, because proximity already implies closeness. So saying close proximity is redundant.
Right.
You said we want to watch out for those natural redundancies, and I say natural because people use them in their relaxed language. Like the end result of the experiment. Well, that's a tautology too. The result is what happens at the end. So saying end result is redundant. So watch those types of things. And there are many others. Basic fundamentals. Well, fundamentals are the basic principles of elements. So saying basic fundamental is redundant.
It's right.
Right.
Right, like reading. Reading is fundamental.
Don't get me wrong. Your character, when your character's talking, your character can say anything that can come out of his mouth. Right. But if you're the narrator, just be careful, because authors narrate. They tell the story, and then their characters embody the words. The characters can say anything, but the narrator has to watch his language, unless he's doing that on purpose.
Right.
Because there's some stories that are written like that. You've seen old stories about foreigners and slaves and other people, and it's written in that type of vernacular. Even the narrator is speaking like that.
Yes, there's this dialect that's happening.
Right. So that was purposeful. It wasn't by accident.
Right.
So you don't want to.
But it has to fit the story. I think you can't just do it for the sake of doing it.
A good writer doesn't make those things by accident. He does those things on purpose.
Right. Yeah. What was the hardest part, Sandy, when it came to, making sure that you were avoiding flaws? Did you have any particular ones that you personally struggled with, or is there one that you that pet peeves you, that you see elsewhere and sort of like, I don't know, gets on your nerves?
One that I had to deal with was not having my physics and my characters in the same plane.
Mm-hmm.
So I would forget that my oddling was in the Orphic Forest, and I'd write him like he was.
Oh, I see.
In modern times.
Oh, I see.
And I'd have to go back and.
We worked together to follow up on things like that. And there were things that I had to watch out for too. So we watched out for one another.
And what did you seem to struggle with, or what is your sort of pet peeve when it came to either reading or writing for Nicholas?
I think it's something that you find a lot in this modern age of messaging and quick writing. And I watch out for it because it can sneak in even though you know better. It's like saying the contraction of UR is your, and you don't want to write YOUR, which is your,
right?
As opposed to YOU apostrophe RE. You want to make sure you get things like that right, and there it belongs over there, or it is theirs. You don't want to say THERES rather than THEIR.
So you watch the airs.
Twos and
yes.
And I think the one thing is he's here too. Is TOO, not TO.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
or TWO.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So just be cautious of those things. And it's not that you don't know better or that you're a bad or a dumb writer. It's those things slip in sometimes.
yes. Yeah. You know.
What is that text to speech program in messaging?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I hate when I'm in a hurry and I say it and I say what I want to say, but then the computer spells everything wrong.
Well, you know, and I guess that's important because some people write on their computer. Some people may even dictate to their computer. But your computer's not going to be right. So like Sandy says, those are things that you have to check over again.
And, you know, as a writer, whether you're a novelist like you are or you're a screenwriter like I am, it's important to have real eyes on your story. And as much as you might love your story and sort of want to keep it to yourself until it's all done and perfect, you want to let people read it. You want the beta readers because that's the kind of thing that a computer may not notice.
You have to... People using the AI, they have to realize that even though you're listening to your computer, you have to look at it too and double check it, because I've had instances where I've had the computer reading for me because I'm dyslexic and I want to know what I wrote and did I write it correctly, and then I look back at it and there are incorrect words in it.
You know, you said something about your eyes. Sometimes your eyes can fool you. You need to use your ears. Sometimes if you can have somebody read it back, have your computer read it back. It's like Star Wars when Luke put the helmet down and it had no vision.
Right.
This was a metal plate in front of him, and he heard Obi-Wan say, you know, just use the Force. Sometimes, in this case, your eyes can fool you sometimes, and you have to listen to it. And you can find mistakes that way, too.
You know, one of the things that I noticed that you do in Nicholas is that how Nicholas became Santa Claus. I call it Nicholas for short. You'll hear me do that a lot. Is that you guys work very hard on making sure that what you're saying is what you mean. And that's sort of a grandma-ism. You know, my grandma used to say what you mean. I mean what you say. And so the idea of having a proofreader, a beta reader, is that they can read it aloud to you, or they can read it to themselves. But they can also bring up where things get confusing.
Yeah.
On this,
and it has to make sense. I remember this old Yogi Berra saying when he said, "I never said most of the things I said."
Oh, yes.
So make sure that what you're saying is makes sense. That it's cogent and in order. You know.
Yes.
And hand it back to a human, because the human is going to have that insight into humanity when you read, and it's important.
You know, we've talked about that on this podcast, a few times here and there. We even did a whole podcast specifically on AI, and I think we'll come back to it. But AI is not going to have those nuances. It's not going to, it can predict really well, but it's not really ever going to touch that humanity that makes a great story a great story. It's that human touch, I think, that makes things perfect. And I think that's why in sci-fi a lot of the times our heroes are human, or there's some half human, half cyborg, or half vampire, because that touch of humanity, number one, allows us to, as we always say, resonate with the character, but also I think if it wasn't human, I don't think we'd really connect with the story as much.
I think one of the things that humans have that machines don't is the ability to have a leap of logic.
Yeah.
You know, because we can do it on a gut feeling.
Right.
And so if you're half human, you can do that. But if you're like Data without the emotional chip, you'll just take it word by word, and you can't leap that logic.
It's probably a good reason why AI is not being policey right now, because they can't make that jump that humans can do.
Doesn't have the emotional chip.
Right. They can't add that idea that, okay, I can understand what this individual is going through. Mm-hmm. Maybe we don't need to press charges, or maybe this time we can let them go, or, so that's something to consider when
there's an old saying in the law. There's the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. The computer will always get the letter of the law right, but it will never have the spirit of the law.
Right.
Because, again, this could be like Les Miserables, where you steal a loaf of bread and you get a life sentence because somebody went to the letter of the law and not the spirit of the law, and not knowing or not caring or not feeling that this individual was starving and they need that.
Right.
You know, and
and Sandy, I think it's important to sort of note that, and I'm sure you might agree with this, that AI and ChatGPT and all of this, they're the new shiny things in the room. Mm-hmm. So I think people feel kind of lured to that. And as a writer, I wonder how is it that you can avoid such a striking thing. I mean, is there no allure to, maybe we can do something together? Or, like, how is it? I think that could be a flaw in writing, is that you're relying too much on the technology. I think there's something to be said about,
I've noticed, just as I call myself an old writer because when I started writing, you had to go to the library.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I miss that. Although I have every library in the world, every encyclopedia in the world, when you turn that page and you smell that ink and you look at the diagrams, there's connection that is made that you don't quite get when you tap a key on the keyboard.
It's interesting you say that, because I grew up in a transitional period where computers were just coming into elementary schools, so we had the spell checks and things, and so that allure of don't worry about your spelling, let the computer fix it. I think that became a flaw because too many people became reliant on it. So I think that's something we need to watch out for as writers.
Mm-hmm. Oh, of course. There was a time in English history before there were even dictionaries. People used to spell things, for instance, any way they felt. And then and Dr. Johnson came around in the 16th, 17th century and wrote the dictionary. And then after the Revolution and times leading after that, then you had Webster come along and write the American version of English. But so to standardize the language, to standardize the words, and so we do have standards, and we must keep those standards and preserve those standards.
They're one of my favorite performers, Victor Borge.
Yeah.
He had this most elegant performance called phonetic pronunciation, where he took a passage from anything and he would read it as written with all of the
But he would do sound effects for the punctuation.
Oh yes.
In order to get the emotion across that you would think you were getting from reading it, and you don't get that often with a computer. Sometimes you don't get that feeling. Even when you're reading off of a paper, you don't get the feeling of what's actually being said.
And I think also
that's what we got you for.
That's right. That's why our stories have every single emotion that our body does.
And I was going to say,
every sensation.
You don't get the feeling of what's being felt. And Sandy, you did an amazing job in accomplishing this in How Nicholas Became Santa Claus. And I've been told that it's better than Harry Potter. Now, I don't want to spoil anything, but I will say that I've been told by readers, a lot of the female readers, mothers, that there's a particular scene in the book which you've been told, Daryl, that they always recall, which strikes you with emotion. And if you're an emotional person like I am, it strikes you and you'll remember it.
Oh, yes.
And so How Nicholas Became Santa Claus without, being braggadocious is a master class, I think, in really on how to communicate in description as you write, Daryl, and in emotion as you write, and sensory as you write.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And if you want to experience this book, if you want to read this book and be a part of this book, visit our website at troopbooks.com, where you can land on our author page and pick up a hardcover or a softcover. You can visit our TikTok, our Instagram, our Facebook, our X at Troop Books. And if you've got an idea for a show, if you got a topic you want to talk about, hit us up at info@troopbooks.com. If we like it, maybe we can talk about it. And I'll talk to you next time on Conversations with the Authors.